Hi, you've clicked on to today's tropical tidbit for Saturday, the 4th of August, and here in the Atlantic, it's getting active. We're now in August, and the peak of the season is coming up, and we have lots of things going on. Closest to home, we have Invest 91L, or what's left of it. It's lost a lot of convection since yesterday. We have a little bit of low pressure trying to develop here off of the Space Coast, but this should run out of time and just move in the North Florida here, bringing typical tropical wave weather, thunderstorms, rain, a little bit of gusty wind, not really a significant issue as was expected. And we have a new storm, Florence, over here that developed from an impressive Cape Verde wave west of the Cape Verde Islands. And as this moves northwest, it'll be strengthening initially, but will probably pull in a lot of this dry, stable air, as you can see by the stratocumulus field northwest of the storm, will probably cause it to weaken and turn a little bit farther west or west-northwest and start moving this way towards the central Atlantic with time. Might just recurve eventually at the end of its life, but we'll focus more on Florence later. Right now, she's no threat to land, and we'll be able to focus on her later because right now Ernesto is in the Caribbean and is there for a guaranteed landfall at some point in his life, and that's what we're going to be focusing on for the time being until he's out of our hair. And here is Ernesto, and what's interesting, this is becoming interesting to track already. Notice the cloud pattern is a lot more organized from yesterday, that we have a strong CDO that has been persistent, strong convection and outflow basically expanding in all quadrants and good spiral bands as this moisture field continues to get enhanced. And yet the recon went in this morning and found a pressure up at 1008 millibars, which has since fallen to 1005, but is still higher than the reading of 1002 millibars that the recon took back when Ernesto was crossing the Antilles Islands with far less convection. So the surprise for me today was seeing how organized the cloud pattern is with a pressure so high and a weakening trend since yesterday. Now, overall, the idea that Ernesto was going to come into the Caribbean and as soon as it entered the Eastern Caribbean, halt intensification and perhaps even slightly weaken until it gets to Jamaica's longitude has verified pretty nicely so far. Ernesto's about halfway to Jamaica and so far has followed this logic and I think will continue to hold off significant intensification until it gets to about 75 west near Jamaica's longitude, and we'll see how that goes. But it is interesting how organized the cloud pattern is here. And I think the reason for this, we sometimes see this in the Caribbean where the plane goes in and the storm is a lot weaker than it looks on satellite, and this usually only happens, I've noticed, in the deep tropics where there's a strong trade wind flow. But notice Ernesto is fairly well isolated, has a tight moisture field that's not being impeded upon by any surrounding low pressure areas, and you can see all the clear skies around the storm except for South America where the typical afternoon thunderstorms are clouding everything up. But it has its own tight moisture field which is allowing it to pump the convection based on the ocean moisture. We have this trade wind flow coming in out of the east, and this is actually causing convergence of air, piling up of air and causing it to rise and help fuel these thunderstorms in the storm. But we also have strong trade winds still to the west of it, which is causing all this dry air you can see here. But remember, accelerating winds at the surface to the west of the storm means that air is sinking to the west of the storm here. And what this is basically setting up is a convective cell, where in Ernesto's area, air is rising. To Ernesto's west, air is sinking strongly, and what we have probably right now is a balance between the two, where whatever air rises in Ernesto, air is rising a lot in Ernesto right now because of the air coming in and the moisture it has, but it's being compensated fully by the sinking to its west, and for that reason the air pressure has not been able to fall, even though the cloud pattern is fairly well organized. And this happens once in a while with these systems, especially in the eastern and central Caribbean when the trade winds are very strong on either side of the storm, both sides. And this is probably what's going on right now. As soon as it gets farther west of Jamaica, the trade winds slow down, and after that point, this is probably going to start taking off, and will start strengthening in earnest and will become a hurricane. The NHC still has this becoming a hurricane by the time it gets to Jamaica. I still think it will hold off on that. I think when it gets to Jamaica or 75 West or around there is when it will start bombing out, but until then I don't think it's going to make it that strong, but we'll see how it goes. Here's the water vapor imagery, and this is interesting to see. Notice that we have Ernesto coming in here. Notice it's starting to grow in size, and this is indicative of the pattern it's going into. Notice that we have an upper level low over the Gulf of Mexico starting to back southwestward away from the scene, and notice the northwesterly flow of upper level air to the north of Ernesto coming down from the Bahamas into the central Atlantic. Whenever you see this, and you have a tropical system coming westward underneath, it's a fairly dangerous situation because this flow here indicates that there's a lot of room out to the west of the storm for upper level ridging to start expanding here over the northwestern Caribbean, which would cause light wind shear, divergent flow aloft, and allow pressures to fall and the storm to strengthen, especially with this upper low backing away simultaneously to the southwest, is going to provide lots of ventilation. This pattern is going to be very ventilated in the western Caribbean for this storm, and given that it is surviving the eastern Caribbean fairly well organizationally, even though it hasn't strengthened yet, it's probably going to take off here in the western Caribbean and will likely become a hurricane before it can hit the Yucatan or any other landmass. Now, the European model has still been fairly unimpressed with this system. Notice it has basically nothing where Ernesto is supposed to be near the coast of Belize in 4 days, but it does strengthen it finally in the Bay of Campeche after it crosses. Now, I don't think it's going to wait this long to strengthen. The European has been interestingly consistent on this solution, but I do think it's a bit slow to start this ramping up. I like the Canadian's idea better. Notice that it has it south of Jamaica in 36 hours, not really much stronger than it is now, but then it starts ramping it up as it gets into the western Caribbean and starts moving a little bit more towards the north by 72 hours, and then strengthens it even more in the western Gulf of Mexico. That's the idea. I think that it starts strengthening west of Jamaica and then reaches its peak after it gets into the Gulf of Mexico. Now here's the track models. NHC right down the middle here with the consensus. It has basically shifted south now into the Yucatan, though we still have some models trying to take it all the way up into the central Gulf of Mexico. But the consensus seems to be the Yucatan now. And here's the GFS. 500 millibars 72 hours out. Here's what we have. We have Ernesto's going to be somewhere in here, passing Jamaica's longitude and moving into the northwest Caribbean. We have the jet stream pretty far north here in southern Canada at this time. There's not really a deep trough to speak of over the eastern United States, but what we have is an area of sprawling, erratic, light winds in the mid-levels, and this indicates a weakness between the Bermuda Ridge out here and the Texas Ridge to the west. There is a weakness here over the North Gulf Coast, and this area of light steering winds is something that a stronger storm will tend to move into and start eating away at. I think Ernesto will start just chugging along, gaining some latitude more west-northwest to northwest as time goes on, moving towards the northeastern Yucatan out of the Caribbean, and we'll just start moving into this area. Now, eventually with time, the GFS shows a short wave coming down out of the Midwest that will swing across the eastern seaboard, could broaden this weakness a bit. The question here is the timing, because after 5 days, Ernesto's already going to be trying to exit the Yucatan here, especially as a stronger system, and it may be too late to move up into this before the Texas Ridge catches it and it starts moving in towards northern Mexico and southern Texas. And with a pattern like this at about day 3, I would expect this to try to move northwest and then try to turn west into northern Mexico or southern Texas. For me, I'm slightly leaning in that direction right now. However, if it becomes a very powerful hurricane in here and moves far enough north, the door may be open for the North Gulf Coast, and this could try to turn a little bit farther north. But right now, it's still 7 to 8 days out if we're going to talk about a landfall for the Gulf Coast, and it's pretty hard to pin anything down with nails right now. So in general, this entire area of the Gulf Coast and of course the Yucatan should keep a close eye on the system as time goes on. We're still talking about it way back over here, so lots can happen as it moves in this general direction, but it's probably going to make it to the Gulf and strengthen as likely a hurricane in this kind of a pattern it's in. So it's something we're going to have to watch pretty closely in here, and the Yucatan may have issues from this. This is going to become a problem. Right now, not a huge deal, but it will become one after it passes Jamaica, and we'll probably be looking at our strongest storm so far of the season and first landfalling hurricane most likely. So we will keep a close eye on this, and we shall see what happens. Alright, that's it for today. Thanks for watching.